Hello, this is Pick, and welcome back to my guide for FTB Sky's Expert Mode. Today I'm starting off by getting some sugar bag bees. These are going to make sugar bag honeycombs. Sugar bag honeycombs are an ingredient for making speed cores for Forcecraft. This is going to make force furnaces 5 times faster than they usually are, which is already very fast. As for the upgrade core itself, it's just a few miscellaneous ingredients that we already have access to, so it's not like it's that difficult for me to make at this stage. Just put the upgrade into the top left slot of the force furnace and it'll activate with the upgrade. I don't know if it had something to do with the ingredient order or not, but the moon dust didn't craft automatically. Thankfully, during the full moon I was paying attention, so when I went to check on it I noticed it hadn't crafted and, well, you just had to put them in manually, I guess. Either that or it has something to do with input order. Today's building tip is Quark's Trowel. This will allow you to randomize which block you're placing based on the ones in your hotbar. It makes proportional randomization based on the number of slots each item takes in it, so if you have 2 stacks of stone bricks and 1 stack of calcite, it'll have a 66% chance of getting the stone bricks and then a 33% chance of the calcite. I went ahead and put down some block placers with acacia logs in it to automate latex. Acacia is the best option when you want to make latex from wood. I think now's a good time to make better pressure tubes. They can both store more pressure inside of them, not that I'll be using much of that yet, and they also lose less pressure for distance. Though you really can only afford that once you have latex rubber sheets automated. Also, I did make a new facility to house all of these space things. I'll be making a rocket today and going to the moon. Speaking of going to space, I'm going to get started on space plating now. It's going to require steel plates, copper plates, and aluminum plates. You'll want quite a hefty amount, at least 12 stacks I believe, maybe closer to 14. Any extra you make won't be going to waste, so don't worry about that. I'll be doing most of the rocket crafting on the front end of things. Also, note that Pneumaticraft speed upgrades work on omnidirectional hoppers if you want faster transfer rates for them. Now, with some space material in hand, I can use some speed upgrades to process these space materials in the assembly table. This will turn them into space platings. Now is definitely a very good time to make sure all of your thermal expansion machines are running fairly quickly, as you're going to be doing a lot of crafting with them. In this case, I'm making more sulfur dust because I'm trying to mass produce polyethylene. In order to make the spaceship, you're going to need 3 full mechanism tanks, that's 96 buckets, of polyethylene, and any extra you make is going to help you, so you know. While I let a bunch of things sit and craft in bulk, I'm going to automate production of elemental craft shards. Now you might wonder, because I'm already getting them from the mob farm, but I'm going to use some of that chew jelly since it makes a whole lot of them at once. Easiest way for me to do that right now is the logistical sorter. I'm just going to make sure that I've automatically smelt a bunch of them and it's going to send each to its own filtered depot. This is also where water wheels come in. Since they were re-enabled in the 1.3 update, I can use them to power some encased fans. This is great for isolated systems that don't require a large amount of SU, and I can't think of anything better for that than bulk processing. Just make sure you prime the elemental evaporators. The production rate will outdo it, but you want to make sure no chew jelly is going to clog up the lines. Having a large stash of each element is going to come in very handy over time. Time to let this thing sit and process on its own. It'll take a little while, but I have plenty of materials. This is the longest part in making the rocket, so the earlier you start it, the better. That's why I had those specific plates auto-crafting already. If you're wondering, you need about 3 1/4 stacks of steel platings to make all the space plating you need. I thought I needed less than I did, so I fixed it afterward. What I need now more than anything is Fluxducts. These steel cables are a little buggy, and while they do the job, they seem to make the power inside the machines flicker a lot between full and not full. Fluxducts fix this issue and make it so I don't have to think about it. They also have seemingly infinite transfer rate, so they'll definitely be good to replace all of the cables in my system with. We'll be unlocking mechanism cables soon, but this is definitely a well-needed upgrade right here and now. I'll also be processing some more signalum in the arc furnace while that waits. To actually assemble the rocket parts, I'm going to need to use compact crafting. This means I'm going to need to make a miniaturization setup. I've already made all of these components before, so no need to show the ins and outs of it. Hey, would you look at that? All of that element I automated is coming in handy. It's almost like I knew I was going to need a fair number of Springaline shards. To place down the miniaturization field, you're going to need to place down a projector and then right-click it, and it will tell you where to place other projectors to fit it within the space. I'm going with the second size here, so that means I'll have enough room to make all of the space parts without any issues. Something important to note is that the Ferro Flare Lantern is going to make invisible lights, and that gets in the way of the compact crafting, and you also want to make sure it's clear of anything else like snow. So basically you want that 5x5x5 area to be completely cleaned of materials before you start using it. Otherwise it's going to not work and you're going to wonder why it doesn't work, and you get the point. Once you have two of them down, right-clicking on it again will show you the locations of the other two, as it's already determined what size it's going to make it. In order to craft with this miniaturization setup, you're going to need to place all the blocks in the order you see them in JEI. This main block is called space plating, by the way. You can look at it layer by layer if you wish. For some reason the render depends on daylight, and it looks weird if it's nighttime. If it's dark for you, just sleep. Once you've placed all the blocks down in the proper order, drop in the final item that starts the crafting process. In this case it's a space plating for all of your rocket parts and such. The item will then drop out on the ground. After the nose cone comes the tanks. The tanks are always going to be the most expensive part of crafting any rocket, and they upgrade with tiers, so they're not always going to use those default space platings like the nose cone will. I've spared you the rest of the crafting of rocket parts, as it's not very interesting to watch, so, I'm just gonna skip it. I can't craft the rocket yet though, because I don't have the NASA Workbench. Now then, let's take care of the rest of the things we need to do before leaving. The first thing is going to be the spacesuit, and that requires blaze fibers, which come from mage bloom fibers. This has its own little chain of crafting. The blaze fibers turn into mana-infused string, and then that gets turned into mana weave cloth, and then that gets turned into marine fabric, and then that gets turned into protective fabric. While that's going, I'm also going to need to make some rocket fuel. The clips here are a little out of order, but that's okay as long as it gets everything across. Rocket fuel is made by combining condensed source with biodiesel. Because the fluid mixer takes a while, you might want to get this going sooner rather than later, but it's nowhere near as slow as the step of making all of those space platings. I'm going to make 6 buckets of rocket fuel for the time being, 3 to get to the moon, 3 to get back from the moon. Condensed source is made by putting a source condenser down next to a mana jar, and that's basically it. I'd give some basic enchantments to your spacesuit, as it doesn't have whatever your current set of gear has, of course. On the moon you can find loot where spacesuit parts have affixes from Apotheosis, so if you want to get some better gear you can just accept some mediocre stuff for the time being. The penultimate part is going to be the oxygen loader. This is what fills the spacesuit with oxygen. Note that it has 2 recipes. The first one is cheaper, but it requires having gone to the moon already, so we're gonna have to make it from the second one. Alright, rocket components are done, everything's almost ready. I just got them at the workbench, and that means I can craft the rocket. It's a glorified crafting table, but, something to add some suspense to crafting a rocket to go to space. This was all the rage back in the day in like 1.6 when it was Galacticraft's time to shine. It's not more complicated than just dumping all the stuff in the GUI in the right slots, but then it also drops it on the ground when you craft it, so I guess if your server has auto item deletion or something, you might not want to craft it until it's over. I don't know, I'm just thinking of things to say while I do all this stuff. That's not the last thing we need, of course. We're also going to need a launch pad. That's the true final component. 2 launch pads, in fact. The launch pad does not come with you. That is a major difference between Ad Astra and Galacticraft. I thought in my test world that it did come with you, and of course because it's my test world I can afford to just spawn one in. But make sure you have that spare launch pad so you can blast off, as well as extra fuel to make the return trip. Before we go, maybe it's time to upgrade my backpack. It's pretty easy to upgrade. You just need some iron sheet metal and an iron chest, and then to upgrade to gold tier you need overcharged electrum and gold sheet metal. I believe that the gold tier backpack can have up to 63 slots in it, and you can't make a stacking upgrade, so it's pretty much a glorified tool bag and or loot bag, but that's okay. I also want to make one upgrade for it, and that'll be the feeding upgrade. If you have food in the backpack, it'll auto feed you from it. Useful to save on inventory slots in your regular inventory. Overall, it's not too difficult to craft, but you will make it in the cooking pot, I suppose, so just keep that in mind, make sure you have one ready. Another thing I'd like to pick up before going to the moon is a spellbook. I could have made this much sooner, but I never really wanted one, so now I do. This allows you to make a bunch of things in Ars Nouveau, even some automation things once you get to a point where you can consistently use them. You start off with a very low capacity of mana to cast your spells, and you only have the options of breaking and harming things, but that's enough for a basic dig spell if you'd like one. Unlike a pickaxe, this won't break, and you can attach modifiers to different spells to have a whole bunch of options. To get more spells, you're going to need glyphs, and those are made in the scribes table. The scribes table can take items from adjacent inventories, or if it's not next to one, you just drop the items on and it will craft the glyph. Right-click with the glyph and it'll be added to the list of things you can make spells with. It's also worth noting that the more glyphs you have, the higher your total mana capacity is, so it's definitely a good thing to make as many glyphs as possible. Spellbooks have tiers, and I believe every tier allows you to use higher tier spells. For example, you can't make a spell with a tier 2 glyph using the tier 1 spellbook. It won't work in that spellbook and you can't cast it. At least I'm pretty sure that's how it works. If not, then I guess better. There are lots of easy spells and glyphs to start grinding out though, so I'd get a bunch of them done now if you can. Here's a demonstration of the scribes table taking in items from the storage lectern. It'll work with mostly any inventory, but the scribes lectern will have you access all of the items from around it, so it's much faster to do it this way. Originally, a craft spell used around a third of my mana bar. Now it uses much less, as you can see here. I could spend all day making glyphs and stuff, but I don't really feel like doing all that little bit of crafting for a book I'm only going to use for specific purposes. If you want to increase the amount of mana you can have on you at a given time, of course you can enchant your armor with mana regen and mana boost, or you could wear the special Ars Nouveau armors. Each successive tier of armor provides you with more mana power. Since it's so cheap, I'll be upgrading my spellbook right away, as I have all the materials prepared already. I can't quite make the tier 3 book yet, as that requires a Totem of Undying, and currently you can't get those. You can get them from Lunarian, so I'll be able to get them by the end of the episode, but for right now it's just out of reach, and I don't really need to make a tier 3 spellbook right now anyway. To quickly explain how to make a spell, you simply open the spellbook GUI, and then you start clicking glyphs. Of course, only certain glyphs are going to work with certain other glyphs. For example, if I wanted to make a dig spell, I'd have to have a form for that spell that fits what's actually going to happen. I can't dig myself, but I can touch blocks I want to dig, and I could shoot a projectile that digs. Augments also only affect certain types of things. For example, if I want AoE, that only applies to spells like dig, because it digs in a wider area. If I wanted to apply Amplify, that applies Level of Fortune, and if I wanted to apply Extract, that applies Silk Touch. I also went and crafted a couple Fluxbores and some Radial Augments. The Radial Augments will let the drill mine in a much wider area. You can enchant it with holding to have the energy capacity increase, but generally you're going to want to increase it via capacitors. I don't have capacitors yet because I don't have the alloy required to make it. This should be good enough though for basic moon mining. I plan on retrieving about a stack of Desh ore. Okay, with 3 buckets of fuel put into the rocket, we're about ready to take off. I filled up the chest plate and the oxygen loader, as well as some extra oxygen cans. They can go in any QIO slot, so I just filled up some charm slots with them. Man, I remember the days when this was the coolest thing back in 1.6. Later, you'll be able to make rocket fuel from oil, but unfortunately we don't have any oil to just scoop up with our hands. We can't just get a few handfuls of oil and go to space, you know? I also will take some various forms of currency with me. I definitely want to be able to trade with the Lunarians when I get there, as that's half the purpose of going in the first place. Because that's what space exists for, right? Commerce. Final checks and you close your eyes, your dream burning like a rocket inside. Naturally, the rocket won't take too long to go up, so it's not that long of a wait. We even get to say goodbye to the World Height Sugarcane while we're here. Yay, the World Height Sugarcane. Now we just select the moon as where we want to go, we wait for it to load in, and we hold space to slow down. I don't think we want to be crashing on the moon today. It's a bit of a waste of a rocket, to say the least. The moon doesn't exactly have air for our resistance, so it's not like we could use a parachute or anything to get down to the surface. Looks like we have some points of interest right here at the start. There's a nice tower for trading with some Lunarians. There's also an underground Lunarian base in the proximity. Make sure to reclaim your rocket from the lander so you don't forget it here on the moon. Not that you can, well, if you craft a certain item you'll be able to get back home on your own, but I can't do that yet because I don't craft it until a little later. Moon loot is pretty good. It gets you a head start on the Desh you're going to need, and believe me, you're going to need a lot of Desh. You'll want to bring a whole bunch of stuff to level up some of these guys, because they do have some trades in the 2nd and 3rd levels that might be of interest. Also, to get that totem, you're going to need Lumium coins, which requires Desh. It doesn't work with Electrum coins. Librarians closer resemble the vanilla librarians in this instance, so you'll be able to get all of those enchanted books you'd like. Also, you can't move these Lunarians like you can with regular villagers. With the Easy Villagers mod, it just turns them back into regular villagers. As I've mentioned, you can find affixed spacesuit parts in here if you'd like. I didn't find any though, so I guess I'm just sticking with my normal spacesuit for the time being. The regular spacesuit isn't that good for protecting you, but it does the job. Make sure you have some extra health to compensate. Desh is easiest to find in big caves, as the moon has quite large cave systems in it. It's also most likely found, I think, towards the middle of the map. I could be wrong, but I had some pretty good results here. Make sure you silk touch all of the Desh you can find, as you're going to want to 1. Save on inventory space, and 2. We're going to be processing these for an average of 24 Desh ingots per ore, so make sure you silk touch it. Home at last. Desh takes a crap load of energy to process in the arc furnace, so we're not going to be smelting a whole ton of it just yet. However, I do need some Springaline-Infused Desh, and I can thankfully use some of that Desh I got as loot. This will save me some energy and time. By using these Springaline-Infused Desh ingots, I can craft a Springaline-Infused Desh mesh. This will generate raw silver from sifting gravel, as well as diamonds and emeralds. There are some pretty good things added to the loot tables to the sifters now that we have this Springaline-Infused Desh mesh. Now that we have raw silver coming in, well, more than what was coming in from that raw lead pulverization. That was a big help though. I went ahead and automated acetaldehyde, as well as its derivatives in volatile redstone and phenolic resin. The last thing I'd like to make today is going to be very circuit heavy, which means I'm definitely going to need a whole bunch of phenolic resin, because that makes thermoplast, which makes circuit backplanes, which makes logic circuits, and then I'm going to be using that with the mineral resin to get those basic control circuits going. Pedestals are handling pretty much all of the logistics from outside the base, and then I just have some power cables coming in. Now to hook up a drying basin so that I can make mineral glass. This is going to be used to make the mechanical squeezer, which is basically a RF powered form of the squeezer that we were using the armor stand with before. However, it sometimes produces more byproducts and such, so it's definitely a welcome upgrade. One such desired recipe for this is getting a lot more Desh out of our Desh ore. This is going to make between 3 and 5 raw Desh per ore in the mechanical squeezer. If you have high levels of fortune, that's better, but this is more consistent and I don't need to have super high levels of fortune to use it. It's also good for getting crystallized mineral chunks out of your mineral logs. I'll be getting into the bulk of integrated dynamics eventually, but for this episode I'm not going to worry about it. Metallurgic Infuser time. Ready? So this thing basically takes a specific type of ingredient, you put it in its special slot, and then it transforms items into other items. The amount of that other thing you're using varies depending on what you're trying to work with. You can also tend to use the enrichment chamber to upgrade the item to get more out of it per item, if that makes sense. Most of the quote-unquote base form items only give you 10 of a given infusion type, but the enriched ones give you 80 instead. Not every infused type happens to have an enriched form, but that's okay. The ones you're mass producing are probably either easy to get or something you can just enrich. In particular, I'm looking to produce quantum mechanisms. There are 2 recipes for producing quantum mechanisms. You have the create assembly way, which only gives you 1 per. It's, I guess, a little cheaper, but why would I bother with that when I can do the better one that gives you 4 per craft instead? It just requires atomic alloy and some source infused gems. And I guess atomic alloy is refined obsidian, and that comes from diamond, and that comes from redstone, and that comes from signalum plates, but honestly, signalum plates even aren't that bad at this stage. Combining all of this junk I've been crafting is going to give us a new item, the QIO drive. I'll be replacing my storage lectern setup with full QIO eventually. This is going to be a transitionary period right now. I'll probably work on it more between episodes, but I'll at least get to where I want to end off by the end of this one. The QIO drive itself is somewhat expensive, but if I happen to craft the QIO drive and dashboard, I'll be able to get a drive for free in the quest reward. This is just to offset that cost so you get one to work with. Each drive itself isn't too awful to make, it's just some invar, some basic control circuits, and some quantum mechanisms. You can definitely tell why I rushed to this point. It's a lot like a basic AE system. You put in items, you put in your drives, they get stored in the system. However, it doesn't use any power, which is very convenient, so at least that's a bonus. Along the way to crafting it, I'll be making a bunch of integrated dynamics components, but again, I won't be getting into that this episode. A lot of things in Mechanism have frequencies. You have both public and private frequencies. If you're on a server, of course, make sure you set it to private and not public. Put items in, take them out. You have up to 3 crafting windows you can open, and you can adjust the height of the dashboard's item interface. It's like AE2, though it does have some features missing from it, but it has some advantages as well. Because this system requires no power and no cables, you can set up imports and exports wherever you want. The dashboard is also wireless, so you can plunk it down anywhere, similar to dimensional storage from Occultism and its wormholes. It doesn't have anything like a storage bus though, so there are some limitations. I'll be pushing forward into the Fabrication matrix, which is something that opens up upon reaching Chapter 3. In order to do that though, we're going to need Desh plates. Desh plates are just a little expensive right now. It requires a whole block of Desh to make one plate. There's a multi-block that's going to make that one ingot to one plate, but for right now we have to deal with that. That requires smelting up a bunch of Desh. Thankfully, we can use the temporal pouch on our peat generators and they'll generate their power much quicker. This will greatly help deal with the power demands of the arc furnace. You're also going to need some energized diamonds or overcharged diamonds or whatever. This is made by putting infused diamonds underneath the energizer. I definitely will upgrade the energizer soon, but for right now it's fine as it is. To get more dimensional shards, you just have to sift endstone with a Springaline-Infused Desh mesh. Now that we have all the components, it's time to build it. Make sure that if you want to see the hologram to build this, you need to do it from inside the Fabrication Matrix's own GUI. Otherwise, it has nothing to render against as it shows it in the world relative to the block position. You can do this via schematic cannon, but you do have to be careful when you do it with the machine blocks, as it doesn't have a recognized machine block in it. You just skip that as the schematic cannon is printing it, and then it will build the rest of it, and then you just place the machine block itself, which is the fabrication matrix, at the end. Make sure you put down the quartz glass. A lot of people forget that, because they just don't see it. Every single Iesnium ingot is going to require 16 silver dust to fabricate, as well as a bucket of liquid force. This is quite the steep price, and that's why you have to automate silver at this stage. You might want some more efficiency on that though. We'll get to that later. I won't be automating Iesnium just yet, because I don't want to waste all that time. You then turn that into an Iesnium ingot, send it through the Metallurgic Infuser, turn that into platinum, and then you have the platinum, turn that back into dust, and then once you centrifuge that dust, preferably with auxiliary sieve augments, you can retrieve osmium from it. I made this osmium so I can make an enrichment chamber. As I previously mentioned, if you use the enrichment chamber, you can get more out of certain crafts. You can also get lots of obsidian dust out of obsidian now, 4 per instead of just 1 like the squeezer. A Hearthstone is going to be useful for space travel, as it means you don't have to do return trips with your rocket. It will send you back to your respawn point, much like a home command. It does have a cooldown, but for its price, that's still pretty good. I need an amount of materials that can only be gotten by sifting sand with a waterlogged sifter. So that means I'm just going to swap it out and waterlog the sifter. The sifter will contain the block of water in it, so you don't have to worry about it flowing everywhere. Thanks to the waterlogged sifter, I now have a good supply of salt. This salt can be put through the chemical oxidizer to make gaseous brine, put that through the rotary concentrator to make liquid brine, and then that through an electrolytic separator to get sodium and chlorine. You can make some gas tanks and put them in the GUI of the electrolytic separator to store them without having to place down gas tanks just yet. Sometimes it's just more convenient to keep things in an item form, especially if you're working with manual inputs. I also need a pressurized reaction chamber to turn these silicon into printed silicon circuits. Of course, that also requires some polyethylene, which you have to dump in via a tank, and then the gaseous chlorine, which came from the separator. Dump the printed silicon, some basic control circuits, and some signalum in the pressure chamber, and you get some printed signalum circuits, and then you combine that in the fluid encapsulator with volatile redstone. This produces advanced circuits, which was something that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take, but here we are. It's worth noting that the PRC doesn't have enough internal energy to keep up with its power demand. This means you're going to have to put in some energy upgrades. You could either craft them, or just steal the 2 you get from the quest reward. That'll hold you off for the time being. Note that the energy upgrades do reduce energy consumption, as well as raise the internal power storage of a mechanism machine. The exception to this is the electrolytic separator, which does not accept them because normally you'd be able to make hydrogen, and hydrogen would go in the gas burning generator, and that would make an infinite power loop, but of course since there is no hydrogen gas burning generator in this, it's just a byproduct of that. By using 1 infused diamond, 4 QIO drives, and 4 of those advanced circuits, I can make the hyperdense QIO drive. This stores double what those 4 individual QIO drives did on their own, or 8 of one basic QIO drive. The last thing I'll be discussing today is how to use this QIO drive automatically. As I mentioned before, you can import or export anywhere from your QIO network. There's also a redstone adapter that adjusts whether or not it's emitting a signal based on the content of items inside your storage. Now, it's not like I don't want my ingots or plates being inputted into my QIO system, right? But I don't want all of them inputted. That's what the bulk storage of drawers is for. To circumvent this issue, I can have a redstone adapter emit a redstone signal when the particular threshold for a given item is above a cap. This is going to unfortunately require a ridiculous number of importers and redstone adapters, but that's okay. The point here is that I'll have a readily available supply of things like, say, iron plates, or ingots, or gold, or whatever. But it won't fill up the drive arrays, because obviously if I let it go from an automated system, it's going to just fill up. Essentially, what you want to do once you set up the adapters correctly is to import based on a whitelist. In this case, I will use iron ingots, and then I have the redstone adapter determining the number of iron ingots in the system. Once it reads that and sees that it passes the particular threshold, it turns the importer off. Thus, it won't input any more iron ingots. Of course, I can exceed this threshold manually, but that's why the automatic isn't going to go unless I want it to. With that though, that's the end of the video for today. So, thank you for watching. This has been Pick. I'm glad to have seen you, and I hope to see you again.